All right, that's my section. I'm now going to turn it over to Alex for the history, capitalism's origin story.
Thank you, Julie. What's up, everybody? I'll be talking about the origin of capitalist production as conceived by Marx. In order to understand this origin, we must first trace the historical development of commodity production. So what is a commodity anyway? So here's Marx's big nerdy definition. As you can see, he isn't the most concise writer, but all it essentially means is a commodity is something that you make in order for it to be sold. So here's an overview of the stages of commodity production that we will be going over: simple, handicraft, manufacturing, and factory. Note that with each successive stage, productivity improves. So starting off with stage one, simple commodity production. In this earliest stage, tribes or families collectively manage their own means of production, such as land and tools. They primarily make things for their own collective use, and only extra unneeded goods are sold to other tribes as a commodity. So commodities play very little role in these societies. Productivity at this stage is very limited, as production methods are labor-intensive and time-consuming. Next, we transition to the stage of handicraft production. In this stage, goods are primarily produced for the market as commodities. The producers own their own means of production, and economic organization is primarily based around one or a few individuals. The notable productivity improvement here is specialization of skills. Artisans could focus on producing one type of good, thereby increasing the quality and quantity of production. Because the artisan was in control of their means of production, they also control their own surplus. However, because artisans didn't accumulate much capital at this stage, as they used most, let me reword that. So artisans did not accumulate much capital at this stage because most of what they earned was used to buy things they needed to live. So I have a question for everybody. As we see in this stage, artisans owned their own means of production and didn't accumulate capital. However, we know that capitalism is a system where workers are propertyless and capitalists have a large accumulation of capital and own the means of production. So how could capitalism come out of handicraft? Does anyone want to guess how Marx was able to resolve this puzzle? And preferably guess if you're not already super familiar with Marxist theory. Managers? Not sure what do you mean by that. I must say no, not really.
Alex, could you restate the question real quick?
Yeah, so how did capitalism arise out of handicraft if under handicraft the workers owned their own means of production and didn't accumulate capital? How did a situation where you go from workers owning their own means of production to capitalists owning the means of production and workers are propertyless? Is it more specialized tool that costs more to own? Not really. Private property law. I mean, Chris,
Alex, I
you
think
know,
you better tell us.
I mean, Chris, you know what I'm gonna say. So the answer is primitive accumulation. So this question is why it's crucial to understand the process of primitive accumulation before moving on to the next stage of commodity production. Yeah, exactly, Julie. They took it. That's the answer. So this is where the means of production originally begin to be accumulated by the capitalist class, which is why it is called original or primitive accumulation. Through various means such as the enclosure of common lands, colonization, and slavery, individuals are able to amass staggering amounts of wealth and forceful confiscation of the means of production from workers. This wealth is then used to invest in production. This all resulted in the creation of a class of capitalists who control the means of production and another class of workers who depend on a job from capitalists in order to make a living. Primitive accumulation is essentially the historical process that kickstarts capitalism by concentrating wealth and establishing the conditions for capitalist production. So, the next stage, manufacturing. Here, because of primitive accumulation, the capitalist enters the scene with the possession of the means of production, raw materials, and money for wages. Alongside the capitalist is the propertyless worker who needs a job. Instead of being separate and scattered, workers are brought together under one roof. Together, the workers divide the work to create a commodity through their cooperation. This division of labor in the workshop is a key productivity improvement as it allows for greater efficiency. Each worker specializes in only a small part of the production process. Additionally, when production is done on a large scale, the cost and materials needed are reduced significantly. With a much higher productive capacity, commodities are able to be produced at a much higher volume. However, because the capitalist class now controls the means of production and not the individual workers, they're able to appropriate the surplus profits. So it just occurred to me, notice how the workers are now socially cooperating together, but the appropriation is now still going to an individual person, right? Under handicraft, it was just one worker and it went to that one, and the profits went to that one worker. But under capitalism, it's a lot of workers, but now the profit is going to one capitalist. So lastly, we have the stage of industrial capitalism. The relentless pursuit of reducing labor costs in a capitalist system often motivates the introduction of highly productive labor-saving machinery. The significant productivity improvement here is mechanization. Machinery replaces human labor, enormously increasing the scale and efficiency of production. This is the foundation for the modern capitalist economy with its characteristic large-scale industry and production for mass markets. This introduction of machinery tends to constantly displace labor, resulting in persistent unemployment. Meanwhile, these efficient machines continually churn out goods, contributing to a chronic overproduction of commodities. The inability to sell these products leads to reduced profit for businesses, leading to layoffs and further economic turmoil. This chronic and cyclical pattern illustrates one of the inherent contradictions and instabilities within the capitalist system in its advanced development. So lastly, we come to the rise of the capitalist state. So industrial capitalism and its crises necessitated the rise of a capitalist state. The state becomes an essential actor in protecting and reinforcing the interests of the capitalist class in a society filled with antagonism and turmoil. However, the state is also had to rein in capitalist excesses and make concessions to the working class for the purpose of keeping social order. In this sense, the state positions itself above society and above class antagonisms. Marx, referring to the class struggle in France under Louis Bonaparte, remarks, "Only under Louis Bonaparte does the state seem to have made itself completely independent," unquote. In its attempt to manage crises, the state tries to channel class antagonisms into state institutions. Ultimately, however, the laws, regulations, and institutions of the state are shaped to facilitate capitalist production and accumulation. In order to enforce this order, special armed bodies of the state, such as police and military, are necessary. As Marx says, the struggle seems to be settled in such a way that all classes, equally powerless and equally mute, fall on their knees before the rifle butt.